Stitch number 26 is the satin stitch. Here we go. All nice and shiny. Here's another example with different shapes worked in satin stitch. We are going to start looking at satin stitch by looking at paper, because basically what satin stitch is a shape filled with straight stitches, one next to the other, with no gaps in between the individual stitches. And I find it helpful to look at paper with a grid as an enlarged version of what happens on the grid of the fabric. So woven fabric has two lines of threads, ones that go vertically, the warp, and ones that go horizontally, the weft, and they create a grid. So all these lines are threads in the fabric, and we create the stitching in the areas that are in between and go across the threads. So let's have a look at, let's say we want to stitch a circle. So here I have drawn a circle, and I find I get the best result when I do satin stitch when I start from the widest part of the shape and then work my way towards the narrower parts. Oftentimes the widest part is in the middle, but not always. If you look at this example here, these organic shapes here, the widest part is not here, for example, is not right in the middle, but often it is in the middle. So let's take our circle here, and now I can see where I want to put my threads. So I have the warp here, which is my main concern right now. So I find the middle and I do one stitch either from top to bottom or bottom to top, it doesn't really matter, to fill in that space. And then I move, in this case, to the left and see how does the shape I have drawn intersect with the grid of my fabric. So I like to think of the stitches in terms of rows and columns. So as I do the stitch, this is a column and these are rows. So now I check to see the next stitch. I want to put it right next to it because I don't want any gaps in between the individual stitches. So now I need to judge whether I need to come down a row or stay on the same row. I think in this case I will stay on the same row. And then I move to the next one. And here I definitely want to come down one row. And I will also stop one row short of the previous two. So now I come to the end of the shape on this side. So then I come back to the middle and do a stitch next to the middle one, and this is going to be the same length as the middle one. And again, when I move over to the next column, again it's the same length. And then when I come to do the last one, I come down one row and I also stop one row short. So let's try and do this without the drawing of the circle. So I ended up with 4 stitches that are the same length and 2 stitches that are a little bit shorter. And it actually worked out that these 2 cover the same number of rows as these 4 stitches cover the number of columns. And that often gives a very smooth result when you're doing circles. If you have the same amount here as you have here. So let's try and do another one. So again, I come to find the middle. Let's say it's this column here. So now to do the next one, the line goes right through this square here. So I need to judge whether or not to come down a row or stay on this row. But since the way I drew the circle, the bottom of this stitch here is on the same row, so I will do the same at the top. And then I come over to the left and I will definitely come down a row here. And then because I want it to be even, I'm also going to stop one row short of the bottom. And then I come across again. Do I stay on the same or come down? I think I'll come down a row. And again stop one row short. And then the next one I'll come down one row and stop one row short again. I'm going to repeat it on the other side so that they are the same, like that. You don't always have an even number of stitches in the middle. You can just as easily have 5 stitches. And notice how I just stop here with a column that spans 5 rows, which just happens to be how many stitches I have of the same length in the middle. And even though there are slight gaps here, the brain will fill in that gap. And one thing to keep in mind when you're working on satin stitch, you're working on it really closely. So you will see all these individual little gaps between the stitches. and it may look quite jagged close up, but from a distance you won't notice. The brain will simply just fill in that shape. If we look at one of the little circles here, you can see the gap there, and over here as well. But from a distance it just looks like a circle. So let's try it on fabric now. And on the fabric, let's try with this triangle, since there are triangles in the pattern. So I'm starting at this edge here, because this is the widest part of my shape. Now you're not always stitching on what I like to call on grid, so that your fabric is running evenly with the warp threads going this way and the weft going the other way. But the same still applies, that you will have to come across as evenly as you can. So like this. And then I look at the top here. Where do I need to put the next stitch so that it follows the line that I have drawn? So working a triangle like this, I really only need to worry about describing the diagonal here with my stitches, because I know that the bottom is a straight line, so it should be as easy as just coming over one thread in the fabric. So now I come down one more row in the fabric, and still one column. Sometimes to follow a shape you have to move down more than one row, and that's fine. I can't quite get the needle to go in the spot where I want it. There we go. And again, at the bottom I just come one stitch to the side. And I just keep following the shape. It's important to draw your satin stitch shapes as accurately as you can, because if you have drawn them a little bit wonky and you want to adjust the shape as you go, it can sometimes be a little bit difficult. So it's better to draw the shape as best you can and follow the shape instead of trying to adjust it. So here I'm actually not following the line I've drawn properly, and you can see the line is starting to curve. So a good example of do as I say and not as I do. Right, so that's the triangle shape done. Now let's try it with one of the circles. So I find the middle of the shape and come up with my needle. Actually, that's a little bit to the right of the middle. There we go, that's better. And then I use my needle to follow the column in the fabric. And I can see that it's actually a little bit askew. So down here I'm going to come over one stitch. And then to do the next one, I come up right next to the first one, and then I come down right next to it at the bottom. And for the next stitch, I come down one row in the fabric. I know it's maybe a little bit difficult to see, but that is what's happening. So then I also want to come up one row on the other side. And now I'm going to come down 2 rows and come up 2 rows. So that's the first half done. So then I come back to the middle. And I had done 2 stitches on the other half in the middle, so I'm going to do 2 stitches on this half as well. And then for the next stitch, I'm going to come down a row and up a row. And for the last one, I'll come down 2 stitches and 2 stitches from the bottom, or from the bottom of the previous one. So that's the satin stitch. And my best tips for satin stitch is always start in the middle, or whichever is the widest part. If you're working circles, try to keep them the same on both sides of the middle. And don't worry if close up your shapes look jagged. From a distance they will look nice and even. Happy stitching! The tutorial you have just watched is part of a series of 31 stitch tutorials that I have made to go along with the pattern for this embroidery stitch sampler. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you want to check out the pattern, you can find the link in the description. And whatever you're making, happy stitching!